The question that we really ask and what we really want to know is, what exactly is Rosh Hashana? What does it mean? What does the Rebbeinu Shem expect of us on Rosh Hashana? Why was it given? And what's the meaning of shofar? What is shofar? Why do we blow shofar? What is shofar supposed to be doing really on Rosh Hashana? The second thing we want to understand is the meaning of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is supposed to be a very chashuv day, a very holy day, and what we really want to know is why. What is the meaning of Yom Kippur, and why is it so special all of the days of the year? The truth of the matter is, we know that if a person does a chet, he can do tshuva. And tshuva is acceptable any day of the year. That's the meaning of tshuva, that's the schus of doing tshuva. What is the meaning of Yom Kippur that makes tshuva such a very special part of reaching a higher madrega, which is different than all other days of the year? I'd like to go into these two basic questions with as much understanding as we can. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are basically examples of something really much more fundamental, and what's called hashpor, that has to do with zman. What do we mean? If you really think about it, the whole thing, all the 365 days of the year, the whole concept of the calendar year is a very strange concept. Why? Because fundamentally what you have is the following. The Rebbeinu Shem created the world at a certain day. That was day number 1. There was day number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The first 7 days, at the end of the first 7 days, the Rebbeinu Shem finished creating the world. Then what should happen is you should go on to the day number 8, 9, 10, and so on, and keep on going down the line. All the days should be basically related numerically in a linear fashion, where you start from 1, and the entire world should count their days simply by adding another number. In other words, right now we should be on day 4, let's say, I don't know how many days there have been since the beginning of the world, but let's say 46,523. That should be the name of this day. But that's not the way the Bria was established. The Bria was established in what's called Gilgul Hazman. And this is a very strange concept. What is the notion of Gilgul Hazman? The Rebbeinu Shem established the world in 7 days. There are 7 days. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, and so on, up to Yom Shvi. And Yom Shvi is Shabbos. And what the Rebbeinu Shem said was an interesting thing. The next day, after the 7th day, is not called the 8th day, but it's called the first day. And the day after that is called the second, and so on. What the Rebbeinu Shem basically said is that we have to count our days by the concept called a week. What exactly is a week? A shavua. A shavua means that after the first 7 days, we repeat the cycle. We go Yom Rishon to Yom Shvi, and then we go back to Yom Rishon to Yom Shvi, and go back to Yom Rishon to Yom Shvi. Why is that? Technically speaking, it just simply be what's called a linear progression. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, so on, down the line. But what we find is that we have what's called the concept of a Shavuot, where every 7 days we repeat the cycle and we call those days the same name. So that the first day is always called, that is the first, the 7th, the 14th is always called Yom Rishon, the 2nd, the 15th, and the 22nd is always called Yom Sheni, and so on, from the time of Adam Rishon till now. So the Rebbeinu Shem was malakit 7 days in like kibbutzim, and like sets, that they were what's called 7-day sets. That's a very strange thing. There's like a sivuv, or a repetition, like a cycle kind of thing. Well, that's number 1. It's in terms. The second thing is another question. Even if we would go that way, where we would say the first week, the second week, the third week, and so on, we find another repetitious cycle, where the Rebbeinu Shem said that after a certain number of weeks, approximately 48 or 49, we start another new cycle called a year. The new year will start. So again we have this new concept of a repetitious cycle called a shana, or a year. Now you have to remember that the concept of a shana, or the concept of a shavua, is an additional concept. Fundamentally, days should be numbered linear. And that's it, from the time of Adam Rishon until now. But they're not counted linear. Instead, they're counted in repetitive cycles, where every 7 days is called a week, you see, and then a certain number of weeks is called a chodesh, or a month, and then 12 of those months is called a shana. So fundamentally, we find that we have 3 different types of repetitive cycles. We have something called a week, we have something called a month, and we have something called a year. Now the question is, why? Why did the Baruch make the Zmanim in such a way that there's a constant gilgul or constant repetition? This is a fundamental question that has to do with the concept of time. Before we can understand the Inyan of Rosh Hashana or the Inyan of Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashana takes place on Aleph B'Tishrei, and Yom Kippur takes place on Yud Tishrei, and so on, the other Chagim as well. Pesach takes place on what? Tetzvav Nisan, and so on. Sukkot takes place on Tetzvav Nisan. Chanukah on what? On Kafei Elul, on Kafei Kislev. All the Chagim that we know take place in specific times. But before we can understand the Chagim, we have to understand the concept of time the way the Torah sees it. And the Torah sees time in a very repetitive way. Can we develop some kind of understanding about that? And we can, I believe we can, in using a certain fundamental concept. The first day that the Baruch Shem started to create the world is Yom Rishon. The Baruch Shem created a certain number of things on Yom Rishon. A certain aspect of reality, a certain amount or quantity of reality was created the first day. On the second day, the Baruch Shem went ahead and created more of reality. Till by the time the 7th day was completed, not the 6th, but the 7th, all of reality as we know it was completed. Now, each one of these days, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, were used to create a different part of reality. Therefore, each day had a different hashpah to it. The Baruch Shem was mashpia from his rotten, a specific, we understand what hashpah. There was a certain hashpah that he had. And remember, hashpah literally means influence, but more technically, hashpah is a certain creative force which emanates from the Baruch Shem. As soon as the Baruch Shem has a rotten, as soon as he wills, suddenly from him emanates what's called a hashpah, or more technically a ha'ora, an enlightenment, and that comes down and actually performs the actual act of creation itself. So, the first day had a certain hashpah, which created a certain part of reality. The second day, third, and so on and so forth. Up to the 6th day. At the end of the 6th day, all of reality as we know it was created. All of reality. Each of these days had a different hashpah, which, the time of each day. The time of each day was connected with the hashpah of that day, with the particular event of that day, which is the amount of reality which was created in the first 6 days. The 7th day, the first 7th day, which was the first day of Shabbos, also created something. You may ask, what did it create? The answer is, the first 6 days, the hashpah created the inyan of choyo, or the inyan of gashmius. The 7th day, it created the inyan of ruchnius. But you may say, ruchnius didn't have to be created, because ruchnius always existed. That's true. But the ability of gashmius to go into ruchnius was created at that point. The specific eruv, or the specific connection that gashmius has with ruchnius was created on the Shabbat. So that was a Bria Chadosha. So therefore we see that the first 7 days of creation, or the first week, since the beginning of time, were involved with hashpahs of creativity, of Bria. Each day having its own hashpah. We see that 7 days were all that was necessary to create all of reality. 7 days. What the Baruch Shem therefore said was the following. These 7 days reflect 7 different events, or 7 different hashpahs. And that's fundamentally what a day is. What does it mean? What is the panemius of Zman, or the panemius of time? What does it mean, time? Time does not mean simply the passage of events, but time more specifically refers to the meaning of an event in terms of the kind of influence it has on the tikkun of the world itself. That's what time means. Hours, or time in and of itself, is a physical entity, which we won't go into, but it relates to the union of the space-time continuum, the concept of time. You see, but the point is, what the Hashkafa tells us is that time in and of itself is nothing, except nothing more than a physical construct, no more than mass or force. These are physical variables. But in Hashkafa, time means hashpah. It means a certain influence. It means a certain event that relates to the ultimate tikkun of the Bria itself. And as far as Hashpor is concerned, there are only 7 types of Hashpor that are possible in the Bria. These were the 7 Hashpors that were related to the first 7 days. No other Hashpor was necessary, and no other Hashpor ever occurred again. Therefore, the days automatically repeat themselves. Because as soon as the 7th day is over, the next day after that really is a day which has a parallel Hashpor as the first day itself. That's why the weeks repeat themselves. Now, what is the Hashpor? That's not what we don't really want to do this. We're not interested in really understanding that at this point. That would take us far off the field. But suffice it to say that the essence of a day, or the essence of Zman, lies its Hashpor, lies its an effect of Tikkun on the Bria itself. And that basically, what Hashem said was that there are no more than 7 different types of Hashpor which come down in the world. And that's it. So therefore, there are really no more than 7 different types of days. The 8th day is therefore nothing more than a repetition of the first day, and so on and so forth. That's why the world follows the concept of a Shavua, you see. Just like we have the concept of a Shavua, we have the concept of a Chodesh. That there's something about the first 4 weeks, approximately, or the first 28 days, however you want to cheshbon, depending on the Chodesh, or the Chodesh itself, is that there's a certain number of days that bunch together and create a new kind of Hashpor, which is called the Hashpor of a Chodesh. The Hashpor of a Chodesh, which is a collection or a set of a certain number of days, is different than the Hashpor of a specific day itself. You see, the Hashpor of a specific day constitutes what's called the unit Hashpor. But if you take enough units, it creates together to form a new kind of Hashpor called Hashpor of a Chodesh. For example, all the days together. We'll go back to the time of Adam Rishon. The first day of Adam Rishon was Yom Rishon, up to Yom Shabbos. After that, the new kinds of Hashpor that will be in the Bria stopped. So the Sunday following was simply the Yom Rishon, would have a certain parallelism to the first day of creation itself. And then it would repeat itself up to the end of that period called Tishrei, which is a Chodesh. When it started the next Chodesh, called Cheshvan, then there was a new type of Hashpor, or actually an additional Hashpor, above and beyond the Hashpor of the days. Those days would get together suddenly, all of them, all 28 days, or whatever, so on and so forth, right, would suddenly get together and fuse into a new Hashpor called Tishrei. Once that Hashpor was finalized, you see, then the next one would start. And that's the Inyan of Rosh Chodesh. Why Rosh Chodesh is so important? Rosh Chodesh is not the Inyan of just the beginning of a month. What's the Chashivas of a month? The Chashivas of a month means that there's a new aspect of Hashpor, which is a new set of 28 days. Rosh Chodesh is the Inyan of Chodesh. It's the beginning. It's the Chashis of a new Hashpor of that next month of Cheshvan. So Cheshvan has a different kind of effect on the Bria than Tishrei has. You see, each day itself has a certain effect on the Bria, and the collection of those days into a month has a certain type of Hashpor on the Bria in terms of its tikkun. You see what I'm saying? So therefore, the next month has a new kind of Hashpor. This goes on until all the Chodashim are completed, and that comes out to the number of 12. But the Bonishim said, just like there are only 7 types of a unit Hashpor that have to do with days, there are 12 types of collective days Hashpors called months, and that's it. At the end of that time, then the entire process starts all over again, and we're back to Yom Rishon B'Tishrei. You see? And that's it. That's the concept of a year, or the concept of yearly cycles. So in other words, what we see is that the calendar, the structure of the calendar, fundamentally follows the structure of the tikkun of the Bria itself in terms of the types of Hashpor, or the kinds of interactive activities that the Bonishim has with the Bria on any one of those particular days. The Bonishim relates to the Bria by virtue of on a daily basis in 7 different ways. On a monthly basis in 12 different ways. And that's it. That's the sum total of all the Hashpors that exist from the beginning of time to the end of time until the beginning of Olam Haba. Olam Haba constitutes a whole new aspect of Bria. It's a Olam Chodesh. It is a new way of keeping time. It's a whole new kind of event and a whole different type of Hashpor. Fundamentally, what we see, the physical entity of time itself is progressive, it's linear. But the aspect of Hashpors are not linear. Hashpors themselves are not linear. Because there's a finite number of Hashpos. There are 7 to the day, and there's a certain group to the month, and there's a certain number of months. And that constitutes the sum total of all Hashpos. Therefore, since the essence of a day lies not in its time, but in its Hashpor, to the Bria, to the Tikkun, the way the Bonishim interacts with the Bria in that particular time to accomplish a certain purpose. Therefore, the days are calculated in a repetitive cycle. Because Hashpors are repetitive, so therefore the days become repetitive. So as far as from a Hashpor standpoint.
Just no Hashpor for thousands.
Now, when the Bonishim gave us the Torah, the Bonishim picked specific times in the year and attached certain mitzvahs to those specific times in the year. The mitzvahs which are specifically associated with specific times of the year are the Yom Tov and the Chagim and so on. And we find that when we're talking about the Chagim, we're talking basically what's called the Mo'adim. And the Mo'adim are fundamentally Shabbos, Yom Kippur, the Yom Tovim in general, Chol HaMoed, Rosh Chodesh, Purim, and Chanukah. And then we also have certain days of the year which are associated with Tanisim. Tisha B'Av, Shivas B'Tammuz, Asar B'Tevet, and Tzum Gedalia, and so on. These fundamentally are specific kinds of mitzvahs that are associated with days. But if days are associated with Hashpos, obviously these particular mitzvahs must be connected to Hashpos. And if we examine the issue, we find that basically the mitzvahs Hazmanias, or the Yom Tovim, the Chag, the Mo'adim, I should say, that was established to Klal Yisrael, these Mo'adim are related in 2 different groupings. There are certain Mo'adim which are connected to the Hashpor of the Yom, and there are certain Mo'adim which are connected not to the Hashpor of the Yom in its original sense, but rather to certain events which happened in that day. Thus, for example, Pesach. Pesach happened in a certain year at a certain time. When the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, in order for them to go out of Mitzrayim, there was a certain, the world had achieved a certain stage of Yeruchnius, a certain, what we call a certain level of Tikkun. The level of Tikkun was so high that Klal Yisrael was zeicher to go out of Mitzrayim and enter into Matan Torah, and from there go into the Yemot HaMashiach. That was basically the kavanah of what the Bonishim wanted. So the Or, the Hashpor that came down in Tefvav Nisan was an incredible Or. Such an Or had never been seen since the time of Adam Arishon. Obviously, because the world had never been zeicher of such an Or. When that Or came down on that particular day, it fused with the Zman of that day, and it had brought Klal Yisrael out. When Klal Yisrael went out and later on they failed to initiate Yemot Mashiach, what the Bonishim did was, what he said was that even though the objective of that Or was not Mukuyim, but the Or itself will still always be connected to that day. So that in every repetition cycle, Tefvav Nisan will always be a day when that Or, which was the original Or of Gula, will always come back down to the Bria. And if they even keep Yontif on that day, and they keep the mitzvahs associated with that day, in a basic way they will enable that Or to come down and be Makadish Klal Yisrael again, with a real zichor. Now you may say, well, Jews we keep every year we go through the Seder, we sit down, we have the Seder, so what? There's no Gula. That's a tremendous pause. It's true, we keep a Seder and we keep the Seder in Golos. But every year that we keep Pesach, every year that Yidden keep Pesach in their mitzvahs, brings down that Or, which then allows the ultimate Gula to happen. What it does is it performs certain kinds of activities which cleanse the Bria so that the Gula Asida will happen. It's not just an event which has no significance whatsoever. It's an event which is characteristic of an Or, of a Hashpor. When that Hashpor comes down, you see, then there is a certain event which actually occurs at that time. This is the Chesed of the Bnei Shalom. That what the Bnei Shalom did was that he tied specific days of the year, or the Hashpor of certain days of the year, to the original Hashpors that came down throughout human history. So that those original Oris that came down would always be repeated and assist Klal Yisrael in eventually reaching its ultimate tikkun. However, what is very critical to understand is that Hashpor itself, you see, is not associated with a particular day of week, it's associated with a day of the month. In other words, the Hashpor of Pesach is an Indian of Yud Dalad Nisan. It's not an Indian of Yom Rishon, chain, sheet, and so on and so forth. All there's a way to cheshbon out when it comes down, you see. But basically what it is, Pesach, or the Or Geula, is an Indian in Chodesh. It's not an Indian in Yom. That's an important distinction. So there are certain Chagam, most of the Chagam, which are totally in the Chodesh. That's what someone said before, what's the Indian of a Chodesh? Obviously we see that the Hashpor of a Chodesh is totally different than the Hashpor of a Yom. Why? Because we see that the Oris that come down to history are connected to the Oris of where? Of the Chodesh, not to the Yom.
Only after the Rosh is made on the Yom.
Well, okay. So fundamentally, therefore, we see that every Chag, every Moed is a Hashpor. And it's a Hashpor which came down because it's a specific event that occurred in history at that time. But the Chesed of the Bonisham was that the Hashpor which came out at the event at that time in history will be constantly repeated. And once the Or came down and it was associated with that particular Zman, every year, which is a repetition of that day, will also be a repetition of that Or. So therefore, even though Pesach occurred Tesvav Nisan many, many years ago, in approximately the year 1240 BCE, you see, and it only happened once, but the Bonisham decreed that that Or that came down once on Tesvav Nisan would always be connected to Tesvav Nisan. And since Tesvav Nisan is repeated every year, that Or of Geula is repeated every year. You see, but the reason why Tesvav Nisan is repeated every year is because of the concept of the Hashpor of Chadoshim. You see, that's a separate concept. In connection with that, there also happened to be that Pesach occurred on a certain day, so it's repeated. So therefore, Pesach is repeated every year because Tesvav Nisan is repeated every year. That's the clue. That's why we started the Hadam of the Shir about the Inyan of Zmanim. That's the fundamental idea. With this particular Hadamah, let's begin to understand Rosh Hashanah. What happened on Rosh Hashanah, fundamentally? And what is Rosh Hashanah? Well, Rosh Hashanah obviously is Aleph Tishrei. What's happened to Aleph Tishrei? What basically happened to Aleph Tishrei? The Buddhism created the Bria in Chof Hei Elul, the 25th day of Elul, basically.
What is that?
Aleph Tishrei, the actual Bria Sa'olam started with Aleph Tishrei. But the actual Bria Sa'odam, as such, was when? The Bria Sa'odam was on Friday, Yom HaShishi, which was Aleph Tishrei. Which means that the actual beginning of the world, Seif Maisa B'machshava Tchila, the true beginning of the world, as far as the objective of the Bria, was the creation of man, because man constitutes the tachlis of the Bria. So Aleph Tishrei, in that basic sense, constitutes the beginning of the Bria as far as the Bunish is concerned, because that's the fundamental the machshava. That's the ultimate goal. Therefore, the Hashpor that happens on Aleph Tishrei is different than the Hashpor that happens in any other day of the year. What was the Hashpor of Aleph Tishrei? The beginning of all existence itself. It was the first Hashpor that started the creative process and started the beginning of the construction of reality itself. Whenever you're involved in a beginning phase, in a commencement, in an initiation of something, you always sit down and examine, well, why am I about to do something? You see, when you're about to embark on a certain enterprise, you first sit down and you have to clarify in your mind exactly what am I about to embark on. Which means that he's conscious. A time of beginning involves an assessment of whether or not that beginning is necessary, what you want to achieve with that beginning, and how you want to start that beginning. All these things have to be evaluated at the point of time in the beginning. If Aleph Tishrei has that first Or, what it has to do with the Bria Sa'olam, which has to do with what? The beginning of creation, Aleph Tishrei has that Hashpor, therefore, which necessitates, or actually demands the Bonishom to sit down, Kaviyachol, and reassess what the Bria is here for. Why did he make the world? Why did he make it? Where is it going? What is its objective? And how should he continue it? You see, the very Hashpor of the day itself demands that particular kind of involvement or activity. Since every time relates to Hashpor, in that sense, the Hashpor which is associated with Aleph Tishrei is a Hashpor which is associated with initiation or commencement. The Hashpor, or the Or of commencement, forces the union of examination, you see, or assessment. And that's why Aleph Tishrei is the Yom Hadin. Aleph Tishrei is the Yom HaDin, not because the Banishim has to pick a Yom HaDin in the year. The Banishim says, well, I want to re-examine the whole status of the Bria one day of the year. Which day should I pick? Well, the day is obvious. The day itself demands such an event. It's not that the Banishim went around looking for a day. The day came up to the Banishim and said, I am the day which must be re-examined. Hence, the Banishim examines the Bria. You see, it's the reverse. It's the Hashpor which makes the demand of the Banishim for the particular activity that must be done that day, which is examination. Hence, Aleph Tishrei, when it came to the Banishim, says, my Hashpor says that we must reconsider what this entire creation is all about. Hence, Aleph Tishrei is the Yom HaDin. Fine. Aleph Tishrei comes along and says, let's re-examine the entire status of the Bria. Banishim sits down with the Ben Shemala, which is the entity or the vehicle of examination, and he begins to assess what? He begins to assess everything which is created. But everything which is created is every source, every entity which exists. Hence, the record of every existing thing comes in front of the Banishim to see whether or not what the nature of their existence and what the continuity of their existence should be. That's the nature of the Hashpor of the Yom. Whenever you're involved with what? Examination, you must be involved with assessing the previous status. What is examination? In the examination of a specific thing is not to examine what's going to be, but what's going to be depends on what was. So, what the Banishim will do to the Bria, henceforth, Mikan Lahaba, depends on what the Bezin comes up with, what has been up to now. Whenever you're talking about examining what was, you bring up the concept of the entity called Kippur, and suddenly, instantly appears the Satan. Because the Satan is fundamentally the agent who brings down the information that relates to what a person was. He is the representative of the Midas Hadin, and that's his function. One of his main functions, his primary function, is the Midas Hadin. It is his job to sit in that Bezin and represent the past, so that the Bezin can determine the nature of the future. Now obviously, what do we know about Din? Din is very severe. Why is it severe? It's not severe because it wants to be. That's the nature of Din. Din means an exact equivalence. What Din means the following. And this is the ultimate tachlis of the Bria itself. And I've said this many times and we'll say it again over here. What Din means is the following. The Banishim says like this. I want to create Olam Haba and I want to put you in Olam Haba. But in order for you to go in Olam Haba, you must perform a certain number of events. What Din says, did the person perform the event? If he did, he goes to Olam Haba. If he didn't, he gets no Olam Haba. What happens to him? He's taken out of existence. You see, because Din is not concerned with the ultimate objective of the world. It only wants to make sure that the world achieves its objective through a fair process, through an exact equation. You see, Toiv la toivim, v'la la roivim. That's it. Din has no Rahmanis. There's no Rahmanis built in Din because that's not its function. Its function is to make sure that everything happens fairly and equally, exactly the way the Banishim wanted. The Banishim said, no one gets a free ride. If you want to get a paycheck at the end of the week, you have to put in a week's work. Din examines whether or not the person put in the week's work. If he put in the week's work, he gets paid. If he didn't, he doesn't get paid, and that's the end of the situation. There is no aspect here of Rahmanis. It's an unknown concept as far as Din is concerned. The Mekatik sits down, and he's the Shliach of Din. And he says, wait a minute, let's look at this person. You see, this person, Ruvain. Did Ruvain do what he's supposed to do or not? So Mekatik runs up and brings him the record of Ruvain. The Banishim looks at the record, and the Mekatik says, well, this man is filled with Chatoyim. He's filled with Chatoyim. There's no way that he's going to make it. If there's no way he's going to make it, there's no reason for him to continue his existence. So the Banishim has a problem. So he says, okay, let's put aside the record of Reuven and let's go on to Levi or Yehuda and let's go on to others. As he goes on to each individual, the Mekatla comes up and constantly shows Chatoim, many Chatoim that the person did. The truth of the matter is, according to the Midas Hadin, the Mekatla has the ability to destroy the entire Bria. And that's exactly what the Banishim wants him to complain about. That's the union of Din. Because just like the Banishim does not want someone to get schar if he didn't deserve it, the Banishim does not want someone to get einish if he didn't deserve it. But a person must get what he deserves. Tevla Tovim Vavala Loim. So the Makati goes up and he's got this incredible file. It's got a computer bank which has the records of all of mankind and every Bria in the world itself. But not so much the Bria itself, because that's not the concern of the Makati. It's only talking about mankind, because only mankind has Bechira. Everything else has no Bechira, so they do what's being told. There's no union of din. You see, their din is totally the din of mankind. Depending on what din is established for mankind, that will affect the din for the entire Bria itself. Automatically as a consequence. But the Makati deals with man, and he's got this master file on all of mankind, and he says to Bonisham, every one of his files, what do you call it, every one of his files is possible, is unfit to continue the thing. Suddenly the Bezin Shemala gets up, and they have to pass in the din. The Ulam must be ne'evad. That's what would happen on a Rosh Hashana. That's what must happen on a Rosh Hashana. So the Bonisham has an immense problem. The Bonisham is stuck in the Kaviyachol, between the Hashpah of the day, Aleph Tishrei is on one side, demanding assessment, and the Satan is on the other side, demanding the consequence of assessment, and the Bonishim is in the middle. The Bonishim doesn't initiate Yom Adin in that sense, because his sons say, well, we have nothing to do today, let's make Yom Adin. Aleph Tishrei demands din. That's the Hashpah of the Yom. Once that mechanism is established, the Satan demands Kippur, the Satan demands its repayment. The Bonisham is listening to both of these things and has no other choice but to be paskin what? And the issue is that the Ulam must be ne'evad. So this is the fundamental problem of Rosh Hashanah. How do we get around this problem? Basically, this was a very difficult problem to get around. It was a very enormous difficult problem to get around. And what we said a long time ago, that the way the Bonishim gets around this problem is by what's called the Hanogas HaYichud. The Hanogas HaMishpat relates to the Hashpah of the Bonishim that has to do with all Inyan of Din. But the Inyan of Hanogas HaYichud relates to all those activities that relate to what's called the Kiyum of the Bria. To keep the world going, even though they're not Zecher to it. We call that sometimes the Midat HaRachman. But the Midat HaRachman is a restrictive term. The more correct term is the Hanogas HaYichud. It's the Hanhog of the Bonisham as this concerns his Yichud, or his ability to look over or cancel out all the Chatoim of a person. There are other reasons why it's called Hanogas HaYichud. We will not go into that. But that's the function of Hanogas HaYichud. From the Bonisham, there are only two Hanogas which go out. Every Hashpah which exists in this world is the result of two Hashpahs. Either it's the result of a Hashpah of the Hanogas HaMishpat, or it relates to the Hashpah of the Hanogas HaYichud. There is no other Hashpah in the Bria. All the Hashpahs of the first 7 days related to Hanogas HaMishpat, and all the months and so on. But there are many activities that the Bonisham performs which relate to the Inyan of Hanogas HaYichud. What is the function of Hanogas HaMishpat? To see to it that man gets his ultimate reward by virtue of his own efforts. What's the result of the Hanogas HaYichud? To see to it that even though man sins, and therefore, according to the din, he should be destroyed, that the world should still be in the sky, and so man can continue going on, so that the world can ultimately reach the tikkun that the Bonisham wants to have. That's the Inyan of the Hanogas HaYichud. So the Hanogas HaMishpat attempts to see that the objective of Olam Haba is reached, and Hanogas HaYichud reached if a man deserves it, and Hanogas HaYichud attempts to see to it that the ultimate objective of Olam Haba is reached, that there's an insurance or a specific security device which ensures that Hanogas HaMishpat will be able to achieve its end. I'm not going to go into the two midas, we spent a great deal of time on that and so on, but these are fundamentally the two midas themselves, the two hashpahs of the Bonisham. As we described the Inyan of Rosh Hashanah, the Bonisham has a very serious problem, because there's a mitzvah din demands ibud. What does the Bonisham do? The Bonisham brings out the Hanogas HaYichud and attempts to sway or deal with the Makatrig in a certain fashion. The only way to save the Bria is by dealing with the Satan himself, by lowering the Makatrig. But how do you lower the Makatrig when that's his very function? From the beginning of the Bria until Avraham Avinu, the Bonisham had a very difficult time in doing that. And he had to employ many, many different mechanisms in doing that. And I won't go into that. One of the mechanisms, he literally had to destroy the Bria once by Noach, and so on. And at the time of Avraham Avinu, before that time, he had to remove all the people of the world from the whole Inyan, the whole Parsha of Torah itself, by creating the Umas Olam. But these have to be examined in their own time. When Avram came along, Avram did a murder favor to the Bria, because Avram gave the Bnei Shalom an incredible weapon against the Taina of Aleph Tishrei and the Taina of the Mekasip himself. What did Avram Avinu do? Fundamentally, Avram Avinu was tested in a number of ways, but the last and final test that Avram Avinu was tested was meaning of the Akedah Yitzchak. What happened in the Akedah Yitzchak, basically? Avram was tested. What was the test of Avram? The Bnei Shalom said to Avram, I want you to kill your son. Fine. Avram went ahead, Vayashkem Avram Baboyke, he went ahead and he nearly killed his son. Good. So then the Bnei Shalom says, now I see that you're Taka, you're Elikim. I see that you're Shemayim. So, we want to know, why did the Bnei Shalom see that Avram as Shemayim? What was the tremendous aspect of this Nisayon in Avram? You want to say because Avram was willing to kill his own son for the Bnei Shalom? That's commendable. But that's not what the situation is. Because the truth of the matter is there were many Goyim who would kill their children. There were people in Moloch and so on who would do the same thing. So the fact that Avram was willing to sacrifice his son is commendable, but it's not necessarily noteworthy as such. It's surely not a reason why the Bnei Shalom will suddenly jump up and down Kaviyachal and say, Avram, I see Mamash your Yerakim, and this is the 10th and greatest of all the sinners that you have. What was the Nisayon of Avram? The truth of the matter is that the Akedah was an Nisayon of Avram of a very, very difficult proportion. Because the Akedah Yitzchak tested Avram in an inyan of Amunah, which normally is very difficult to understand. When we hear bad news, we make a bracha, Dayan Emes. Why? Because we know that the Bnei Shalom is a true judge. Even though we cannot perceive the benefit of the event, why it happened, and it looks like a terrible death, we know that there's something that came out of this. There's an Indian of Mishpah here. We say Dayan Emes. The Bnei Shalom wants every Yid to be an Emunah in his Mishpah, to believe that he's a Dayan Emes. So in many cases, the Bnei Shalom will test the person to see whether or not a person has Emunah in the Bnei Shalom that he's not a Dayan Emes. But there's a higher madrega of the Bnei Shalom that the Bnei Shalom wants us to test him, which is not the Emunah in his Mishpah, but it's in his Emunah in his Yichud. In other words, in his ability to be Soleach, the ability to overlook Mishpat, and the ability to carry reality through a Kiyam, even though reality itself should be Nevad. That's the meaning of Emunah HaYichud. So what the Bnei Shalom did was, he tested Avram in this Emunah itself. Why? Because the Bnei Shalom said something very strange to Avram. He said, I promise you that you will have a son, even though you're 100 years old, and so on. And Mitzvah Torah, you should not have a son. I promise you have a son. And from this son will come out your entire Zerah, Paris for itself, which will represent the Bria, the Tikkun of the Bria, instead of Adam Rishon. So Avram saw that his son was a very important vehicle for the ultimate Tikkun, which is Yitzchak himself. Yitzchak was born, and he said, Kibi Yitzchak, he called a Zorah. From Yitzchak will come the entire Tikkun of the Bria. So the Bnei Shalom knew that Avram knew that the Bnei Shalom gave him Yitzchak, not because he gave him a son. Tzaddikim don't want sons because they want just children. It's not that way. Avram understood that the birth of Yitzchak represents, especially since the fact that both of them were too old to have children. Yitzchak was born up in Nes, which means that when Yitzchak was born, the Bnei Shalom showed the Haftocha. You see, that Kaiser would be born up in Nes, in the sense that Kaiser would survive no matter what Kippur comes against them. So he understood that the birth of Yitzchak was a tikkun against everything, against whatever Kippur the Satan will run up to the Bnei Shalom and say. The birth of Yitzchak symbolized that Kaiser will survive every Kippur, and so on. So he realized that Yitzchak was a fundamental instrument in the tikkun of the Bria itself, in the guarantee that the Bria would reach its tikkun and be zocher to Yemot Mashiach and Elam Haba in that way. Suddenly the Bnei Shalom turns around and says, kill Yitzchak. So Avram must have been thinking, wait a minute, what do you mean kill Yitzchak? First he tells me he's going to give me Yitzchak, now he tells me to kill Yitzchak. But Yitzchak is the tikkun of the Bria. The Bnei Shalom swore to me by the Bris Ben Absalom that what? B'mo'eda. How do I know that my children will inherit the land? This was the Shaila. How do I know? How do I know that Kaiser will be so steeped in chet that they will lose the entire chelik? How do I know this? So the Bnei Shalom was maftichim that such a thing would never happen. And that Haftarah was through Yitzchak. It's to the beginning of Yitzchak. Now the Bnei Shalom turns around and says, kill Yitzchak. So the Bnei Shalom saying, wait a minute. I decided to recant, to go back about Hashana to you. If I tell you to kill, if I say to you that Yitzchak will be born to you, then I'm promising you a tikkun. I'm promising you that your children will reach an ultimate objective. But if I tell you to kill Yitzchak, the only interpretation is that the Banishim have chalota, fundamentally. You see, because how could the Banishim make Kayam the Bria by killing Yitzchak if Yitzchak was the fundamental mechanism of the Bria? It doesn't make sense. So Avram sat there and tried to figure this out. What's the meaning of this tzivoy? What's the sense of this tzivoy? What this Nisuin that it was tested Avram's immune on the highest degree. Because it didn't test what he called the Indian of Din, because Avram knew that Messiah Din, Taka the Bria doesn't need a tikkun, shouldn't even have a tikkun. Yitzchak was a promise of the tikkun of Hanagas HaYichud, that the Bria would be Mekuyim, even though it's not Kedai, even though there is a tikkun. And now the Baruch wants to go back. So Avram sat there and realized, wait a minute, what is it? Maybe there's something wrong here. Maybe there's a mistake of some sort. It doesn't make sense. The Baruch is asking me to believe that two opposing things, the concept that there's a guarantee for the tikkun of the world, and the concept that the vehicle was supposed to bring that guarantee must be taken away. That's an impossibility of contradiction. So Avram said, Father, I cannot understand such a zach. I cannot. But commander of Rachmana L'Tavov, the Avram said, I don't understand what's going on here. But I believe in the Bunishim as higher than Din. That in some way he's able to pull something which looks in his face a total contradiction. I have an Amunah in his Yichud, in what's called Yichud Shitotay, in his Rotten, that if his Rotten is in Makayim the Bria, that such a thing will happen, even though I cannot do. So therefore what the Bunishim tested Avram was in the most fundamental aspect of Amunah, to believe that the Bunishim can do two opposite things at the same time. That the Bunishim is a master of contradiction itself. And that the Bunishim, even though it looks like a contradiction, in our eyes it's a contradiction, but in the Bunishim, it's something which has a total shlemus, except that we cannot understand. So fundamentally, what the Akedah Yitzchak was a test, not of Avram's logic, because our logic said that this is absolutely ridiculous, you see. So the Bunishim was seeing, does Avram believe in me because of logic? Does he see me only in terms of din, in terms of logic, in that sense? But that's not what I want. Klal Yisrael itself must be the very expression, not of logic, but the expression of the kiyum of the Bria, even though the Bria is not Zoicha. That's the essence of Klal Yisrael. So therefore my test of Avram is that Avram will be maimin in a mode which is higher than logic. If he will be maimin in an aspect, in a hadrocha, in a ashpor, which transcends logic, and has to do with my machshavot. My machshavot is different. What does Avram believe in? If Avram believes in a God of logic, in a God of justice, then he will refuse, you see. But if Avram believes in a God of Rachmanis, or in a God which surpasses logic, or surpasses all being, in that capacity, then he will go ahead. But you may say, well, the fundamental thing is this. You may say, well, let Avram sit down and figure it out, and Avram realizes that the Banishim is Zoicha, the Banishim to be Mazaka the world with a Yichud, and the Banishim is capable of contradiction. What was really the test of Avram? These were the two sheetas that Avram had to figure out. Is the Banishim a Banishim of logic, of din, or is it a Banishim of chesed, of Yichud? Which one is it? So, normally you would say, well, that's a simple thing. Avram obviously would realize that the Banishim guaranteed it, it must be that. Because the truth of the matter is the Banishim was testing another dimension. These were the components of the Nisoyim. But what the Banishim was testing Avram was his gaiva. Because the truth of the matter is this is the ultimate Nisoyim of every person. The negia that a person has. When the Banishim said to Avram, he said, from you will come out the tikkun of the Bria. That's a very big compliment, isn't it? You see, it's a tremendous compliment. And the Banishim said, how will it come out to you? It will come out to you, why? Because your son, Yitzchak, is the tikkun of the Bria, and he comes from Nes. So Avram was very complimented. First of all, he was very misameach, because the Bria would have tikkun. But it is also a personal compliment here as well. Suddenly the Banishim turns around and says, your son must be killed. Now, if your son must be killed, you are no longer the vehicle of tikkun. Which means that I want to see, are you a kind of person that wants tikkun? Or are you a kind of person that wants the tikkun to come through you? You see. You know, that's the whole we're all very happy when Toiv goes in the world, everyone is fine, when Chasadim is done, and so on. But the truth of the matter is, everyone has a negiyah. We want to be it. We want to be the Rosh Yeshivas. We want to be the ones who sit in Mizrach Van. That's the thing. It's important for Torah to be. It's very important for Klal Yisrael to have Torah. It's important for Shurim to be given, and so on. But what happens if you're not the one to give the Shurim? You see, what happens if you're not the Rosh Yeshiva? Someone else is. Is the welfare that comes from Klal Yisrael greater than the personal sense of satisfaction that you have? This is the fundamental test of every tzaddik. Basically, this was the test of Avram. The test was not only whether or not Avram would choose between a God of justice and a God of yichud, or a God of mercy, but whether or not Avram would choose to have a tikkun through himself or through another means. What's more important, the Ratzon HaBorei or the Ratzon Avram Avinu? If Avram felt that the Ratzon HaBorei was greater than his own Ratzon, then he would say, in some reason the tikkun will come by even though Yitzchak is no more. You see, the Bonishim will mekayem that talk in some way that I do not know. But if we call Avram wants to believe in his own tikkun or whatever have you, he'll say, wait a minute, it's impossible, it's insane, I can't kill Yitzchak. Yitzchak is the claim to fame. Yitzchak is the way that the tikkun will go through the world through me. Because the Bonishim says, it's the same thing with Moshe Rabbeinu by the Egel. The Gemara says, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, we're going to get into that in a minute by Richard, when Moshe Rabbeinu said about the Egel, he ties his Bonishim, please don't kill Klal Yisrael, even though the Bonishim said to Moshe, wait a minute, I'll make a number from you. Moshe said, forget about Klal Yisrael. You're telling me I should remember the schus of it? Wait a minute, you're there Avram, aren't you? You were born from Avram, yes? So I'll make it from you. And in that way I'll still keep the original talking to the others. But it's going to be your nation. So suddenly Moshe was on the scene, wait a minute, here's an incredible opportunity to get the whole thing from me. So the Gemara says that Taka Moshe, one of the things Moshe said, one reason why he fought, and he said, I don't want this. Take me out of your Torah. Why? Because Moshe says, what far bezdoyan he would have to go to the others. If you make the nation for me, and from me it comes this, what am I going to say to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? What? That I was so selfish, and it was my own personal aggrandizement that I wanted for me, when they themselves were menasa on the very same zach, and they overcame that personal sense of worth. When it came to the Nesoyin Avram, when it came to Avram, and Avram was tested, and whether or not the Gulu would happen personally through his signature or not, he passed that Nesoyin, and he accepted the Yichud HaBorei, the ability of the Bonishim to transcend all logic and all contradiction. Why? Because he realized that the Bonishim, even though it doesn't go through his means, in his own personal sense, the tikkun of Klal Yisrael is greater than the tikkun of the Yochid, it's greater than the personal sense of esteem or the personal accomplishment of the individual. So Moshe says, how could I be a difference? What kind of bush would I have had in front of Avram and such a thing? You see? So therefore I fought for the Indian that Klal Yisrael should be Neskayim. And that way. When Avram was under the Nesoyin, the Bonishim was very mesameach. Why? Because the Akedah Yitzchak did something that the Bria never had before. What? It's not the fact that it permitted the Avram to suddenly pass the 10th test, and now Klal Yisrael can come out from Avram. Something else happened by the Akedah which was much greater than just the fact that even Klal Yisrael was allowed to continue. The Hanochas HaYichud had a new taina to the Satan. Why? What was the taina? Because the Hanochas HaYichud is the Inyan of Chesed. It wants to go Lifnei Meshus Hadin, the Mailam in Hadin. But how do you go to a Satan in the Mailam Hadin? The only way to do that is to taina to a Baal Din himself. How can you go to a Baal Din and say, I want to go to Mailam Hadin? A Baal Din doesn't respect that. His criteria are Din. The inyanim of the Mailam Hadin has nothing to do in a court of justice. Mercy has nothing to do in a court of justice. You want mercy? Go to some other court. You have no ethic over here. But Avram gave the Yechulis and the Bonishim to go Mitzar Adin. Yichud came Mitzar Adin and said, wait a minute, we have to be noyeg differently on Hashana, even though Allah Tishrei demands din, you see. But now that Avram did this Nesoyin, the Bonishim says, I have a new kind of din. I come to the court and I claim that even though Allah Tishrei demands din, I will now bring down a hashpah in the world which could be meichel the world and mekayem the bria. Why? Because Avram was oimed bedin, and that din allows me now to mekayem the world in din. This was a tremendous gift that Avram gave to the bria, that he gave the weapons to the Bonishim. He gave the Bonishim a new sanega to the bria, not just the Klal Yisrael. He gave him a new sanega where the Bonishim could kind of connect him to be noig on the bria lifnei mishradim. Why? Because Avram was noig in his Nesoyim lifnei Mishus Adin. That's why we blow the inyan of the shofar. What's the inyan of the shofar? Because when we blow the shofar is ma'ur the schus of us. What's the inyan of the schus of us? Nothing more than to be ma'ur the hanagas hayichud. Because we say when Klal Yisrael blows the shofar, Klal Yisrael says we are the Zer Avram, and we can come up to the Bedin Shemaila mitzar hadin, not mitzar chesed, and demand that you be noig l'mayla min hadin. Why? Because Avram was oimed ben Nesoyan badin. Badin, that's why he said here, the Keil Oyach Din, the Choyman Ma'amusav, Badin. That din itself demands the Mailam in Adin. This is the Indian of the Shofar. The Shofar was an incredible weapon, a tremendous Sanega to the Bonisham that he never had before, Avram. You see, before that the Bonisham had to do whatever he could to Mekayim the Bria, connected pure din, the Toik of Adin. Avram gave him a new Sanega to Mekayim the Bria, Badin itself. And this is the whole Inyan of Rosh Hashanah. That's the power of the shofar. And the Inyan of the Akedah Yitzchak. It's not that we blow shofar and therefore we me'oyer Rachmanis. What does the shofar have to do with Rachmanis and these things in Psalms? That's the thing. The shofar is meramas, or the shofar, again, we call it, brings up, or creates the remembrance of the original event of Avon, which is the Inyan of Din itself. So suddenly, connected to Makati the Satan appears a new Malach, and that Malach is the Saneda himself, Michoel. And Michoel runs into the Satan and goes to the same court of justice. And when the Satan says, what do you have to do in the court of Din? I am the Katega. What shaykhs do you have here? Michoel says, I am the Sanega, and I throw down Din to negate your Din. What Din? So Michoel says, do you hear those shofars? Do you hear those shofars? Those shofars is a din which Avram shtot in the Bria. Hence, you cannot say anything. So suddenly the Satan has an avuvia. He has an avuvia. Although he becomes like confused. Because he doesn't understand. There's something very strange here. How could Hashpor L'mayla din Mamish go against him? And yet he sees its power. And he doesn't understand where it comes from. There's an avuvia. In the sense. There's an avuvia in the sense that a yichud could go against the Makatlik in the Bezdin itself. This is the avuvia that the Satan experienced.
It didn't work in against.
That's the Indian word says over there when Avram finally left the Mokum of the Akedah sister. What did he call the place? Hashem Yeroah. That's what the name. It says Vayikos HaMokum is Hashem Yeroah. Hashem over there is the Shem Havaya. Why? Because the Shem Havaya is what? It's a Hanukkah Hayichud. Hashem Yeroah. In other words, this Nisoyan that I went through and that I did is Ma'ur the Midas HaLachman. It's Ma'ur the Indian of Hashem, of the Shem Havaya, the Hanukkah Hayichud. He will see this place. He will see this place, Misara Din. The Din itself will allow it. So Aleph Tishrei will never have the koyach to undermine the Bria that Aleph Tishrei always had before. Because Hashem Yeroah. I have demanded Misara Din that Hashem Yeroah. That the Mitzvah Rachman Yeroah. That the Mitzvah Rachman has the koyach to go in front of the Bedin Shemala and throw out its trainer, connected the Makatrik himself and Ma'av the Makatrik, so that he's not Makayim. But Makatrik has the ability to do certain things, there's no question. But he cannot be Makatrik to be Ma'abed the Bria. The Kiyum of the Bria must stand. So the essence of Rosh Hashanah lies in the word Kiyum. The essence of Rosh Hashanah is the Kiyum of the Bria. Why? Because it relates to the fact that the Midas HaChesed itself became Nis'arav in the Midas HaDin. And once it became Nis'arav in the Midas HaDin, it had the Yecholis to go connected the Din and Mekayim the Bria itself. We can repeat the scenario of Rosh Hashanah, in a sense. The scenario is basically the following, in a somewhat of a dramatic tone. As soon as Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei appears, Aleph Tishrei comes to the Bonishim and says, I am the day of Hashpor, of reassessment, of Ischachus. I am therefore the day of reassessment. Let's sit down. So the Bonishim suddenly calls in the entire, all the Shemayim, today is the day that the Bezdin must sit. All therefore people of the all Malachim and everyone associated with Bezdin, come and sit down. As soon as the Bezdin is now sitting, the Bonishim announces Ba'achroza, let the Satan come forth and provide us with the information about the past. The Satan comes forth and provides all the information. But the information is incredibly damaging. The Bonishim then looks at Sanega. He looks to Mechoel, who fundamentally is a Sanega of Klal Yisrael. Mechoel cannot get out of his seat. He can't move. Why? Because the evidence is so damaging. Mechoel is mama's shamefaced and can't say a word. Suddenly the Baruch Shem says, let us adjourn. Let us adjourn until the day. And they adjourn until the day, and they wait. And suddenly, they all sit, and suddenly they begin to hear the Tchiyas, and the Shvorim, and the Tuah. Suddenly, as soon as it come up, it's a Me'ura, a whole new set of arguments. Mechol then stands up and says, now I will offer my arguments. And the arguments that a Mechol offers is the following. It is true, whatever you say is true. There's a tremendous kittug on Klal Yisrael, I grant you that. But there's not a kittug on the Bria. The world must go on. That let's look rather on an individual case, on each individual what his kittug is and how we'll deal with that kittug. But you, something cannot come and make kittug on the entire Bria itself. That Bria is now Mitzvah Din, has the right to a kiyum. So the Satan becomes very confused, and he realizes suddenly that his whole power of kittug is restricted to a much smaller sphere. He originally thought that he would be able to completely cancel the Bria, but he can't. So he becomes a Uv, as though a person suddenly develops a Chalisha, a sudden Chalisha, and he gets up with much less koyach than he originally had. Nichnas b'gaiva v'yotzo b'shifras. That's fundamentally what it is. But in order for that to happen, the shofar must be blown. And that's the mitzvah of shofar. And that's the gift of Avon. And it's an enormous gift, you see. That's how it's able to do what it does. So Avon was Matzal the Bria. Not only Klal Yisrael, he was Matzal the Bria. Because his Nisoyin was an exact reflection of the Hanugas HaYichud itself. And allowed the Hanugas HaYichud itself to enter into the Bezin Shemala in order to be a Sanega for the Bria. Let's examine now the second day, Yom Kippur. According to everything we've said, the evening of the Gilgul of Yomim, the repetition of days, and the repetition of months and years and so on, and the concept that every day represents a certain hashpah, we see therefore that Rosh Hashana is an outgrowth of a hashpah, really. It's the hashpah of Aleph Tishrei that begins to start the entire mechanism. Fine. Let's now, with that same understanding, begin to go to Yom Kippur. What in heaven's name is Yom Kippur? And I don't mean to be facetious. The Baruch Shem said that any person who does a chet could do tshuva. So we can do tshuva. Fine. But then the Baruch Shem said, I give a special day Yom Kippur for tshuva. What is so special about Yom Kippur that has to do with tshuva? Not only that, the Baruch Shem says two things. Not only do I say that Yom Kippur, which is when? Yud Tishrei, the 10th day of Tishrei. You see, not only do I say to you that the 10th day of Tishrei is a time when you should do tshuva, I will tell you how to do tshuva. I want you to be ma'ani yourself in 5 different ways. Don't eat, don't eat, achila, shasiya, and so on and so forth. So the Baruch Shem is saying 2 things. Number 1, I want to tell you that on the 10th day of Tishrei, I want you to do tshuva. It's a special school to do tshuva. Number 1. And number 2, I will prescribe to you how to do tshuva as well. So the first thing we say, first of all, why should tshuva be refined or confined rather to a specific day? That's number 1. And number 2, why did the Baruch Shem tell us how to do tshuva? And number 3, why is that day the 10th day of Tishrei? This is the problem. What does it have to do with the 10th day of Tishrei? What happened on the 10th day of Tishrei that's on? Now, the truth of the matter is, we understand Yom Rishon has a tviyah of Hamad B'Din. What is Yom HaSiri? Yom HaSiri is not a day in itself, really. The 10th day, you see, Rosh Hashana has to do with Aleph Tishrei, with Yom Rishon, which is the union of the day, Yom. The hashpah of Rosh Hashana is the hashpah of the Yom, but the hashpah of Yom Kippur is the hashpah of the Chodesh, Tishrei. In actuality, what we find about Yom Kippur is the following. The Gemara says fundamentally that on Yom Kippur, on the 10th day of Tishrei, the Yetzer Hara or the Satan does not function. Now, the question is, what does that mean that the Yetzer Hara doesn't function? What does that mean? The Gemara said that fundamentally the Satan does 3 things, and that's his function according to Hanugas HaMishpah. 1, he's mafater. He attempts to seduce man to do a chet. As such, he's called the Yetzer Hara. He is mekatrig. If a person does a chet, he runs up to the Baruch Shem and accuses the person in front of the Baruch Shem, the Bezin Shemala, right? As such, he's called the Satan. And then finally, if the person is found to have done the chet, he runs down and kills him. In that function, he's called the Malach HaMofes. So, the Sitra Achra, to use the Kabbalistic term, is the Yetzer Hara in seduction. He is the Satan in accusation, in prosecution, and he is the Malach HaMofes in terms of execution. So, when the Gemara says that Yetzer does not function that day, what does the Gemara mean? Let's look at Yom Kippur. Do we all lose our taivas in Yom Kippur? No, not at all. So obviously the Yetzer functions as a seducer. He's still healthy as a seducer. Does the Yetzer function, do people die on Yom Kippur? Obviously they do. So there's still a Malach HaMavis. What changes on Yom Kippur? On Yom Kippur, what happens is the following. That the function of the Sultan as a makatrig is no longer. It's the Sultan quality which is gone. The Buddhism does not allow the Sitra Achar to run off, the Malach, the Sitra Achar to run off and to be makatrig against Klal Yisrael. The Bezin Shemala does not sit, and Bechlal, even where it does sit, there are certain parts of Bezin that do sit, because there's a Bezin that sits every day. That's the truth. Nothing can be done in the world without a Bezin. So the Sultan cannot do anything. The Malach HaMavis cannot take any person's life until he's mitzvah that day to take the person's life. So there's always a bezin in operation. But most of the courts do not sit that day in that sense. But in any case, in every bezin which sits, fundamentally, the Sultan cannot be makatrig. The question is, if the Sultan cannot be makatrig, what advantage do we have because of that? We have a very interesting advantage. When a Jew davens, and when he does tshuva, what happens to that tefillah? That tefillah and that tshuva goes up to the Baruch Shalom. You see, it goes up to the Baruch Shalom and they begin to examine it. Is it sincere? What were its motives? Where is it coming from? You know, is the person going to really do tshuva? Many, many things and so on. Who examined these things? The Sultan himself. In other words, in every day of the year when you do tshuva and you're misfollowed to the Baruch Shalom, that tefillah and that tshuva carries with it an enormous weight of kippur, so that whether or not it will be moyal, whether or not it will be effective, depends on a great deal on the extent of kippur itself. Period. You see, a person can do tshuva, but let's say that tshuva is not sincere or half sincere, then the Catholic will say, what's how tshuva is thus? You know what? You think he's doing tshuva, but yesterday he did pumpvaker. Or we see right now he's doing pumpvaker. Or whatever the situation is. The Yetzer has the reshus to examine every tshuva that comes up to Klal Yisrael and try to knock it down. You see, it's not as you do tshuva, suddenly it's going to come up and the Baruch will be meichel you. You have to be zeicher to do a tshuva. And whether or not you're able to do a tshuva depends on the kippur itself. That's how powerful the kippur is. But Yom Kippur is a very strange day. And this is the school of Yom Kippur. What the Baruch said is that I will leave forth a new hashpor in the world. And that hashpor will block the Sultan from being mekatig in the Bezin Shemala. As long as he's blocked and he's not around, every tshuva that comes up will automatically pass without any examination. How do you have an example of this? The example is, for example, when you work for a certain firm and you're covered by a certain health insurance, right? Let's example you resign from the firm. So what happens is, many times the insurance company says, we will give you 30 days to renew the policy as an individual. So you may say, well, what do I need you to renew it? I can always buy an individual policy. But sometimes the insurance company says the following: since you are part of the group, we will allow you to insure yourself without any physical examination. Period. You see. Because we will look away from any physical deformity or any physical event that you have and will accept your insurance. But most times, insurance companies will demand a physical examination. It's the same thing. Every day of the year, the Bezin Shel Demara demands an examination of the tshuva and tefillah. On Yom Kippur, there is no examination whatsoever. Why? Because the mekatig is nowhere to be seen. The Sultan is gone. Hence he's gone. Every tshuva and every tefillah comes instantly right up to the Bezin Shemala and goes right through. That is an incredible segula. It's an incredible koyach that we're able to do. I mean, that we were zeicher to. The shaila is, how does the Baruch do that? Where did he get the koyach? The absent, the mekatig. We see where he got the koyach on Rosh Hashana. But where is he? But on Rosh Hashana he has the koyach to absent the ultimate kippur, to mekayim the bria. But where did the Baruch have the koyach, mitzvah din, to take that something, right? To take that something and see to it that he's not mekatig at all. Where did the awe of Yom Kippur come from? Where did the hashpor of Yom Kippur come from? The hashpor of Rosh Hashanah we saw comes from the Akedah Sitra. That's the Inyan of Shefa. Where did the hashpor of Yom Kippur come from? Let's go all the way back. Let's go far back to Yetzias Mitzrayim. And let's examine what happened at that point in time. When the Yidden left Mitzrayim, they came to Mount Sinai on Shavuos. Shavuos is the Yom Tov, or the days which have the hashpor of Matan Torah. But the hashpor of Shavuos is a very strange hashpor. Because it's the hashpor of Matan Torah. What kind of Torah? I'm not going to go into details, but I've said many times that all HaTorah that came down to Klal Yisrael at the time of Shavuos, the original Yisrael, was the same all HaTorah which would also will be Mizgala through the Mashiach. Specifically Mashiach ben Yosef. Why? Because the Baruch Shem had intended that when Klal Yisrael would reach Mount Torah, they would be zircha to the Gula Asida. He had no intention that it should go on for several thousand years in that sense. His intention was that what? That Klal Yisrael should be zircha to the Mashiach. So the ore that came down on Shavuos was the ore Hagonus, the ore Shel Mashiach itself. And Moshe Rabbeinu, who was Makablet, was the Mashiach ben Yosef. What happened? Moshe then took the Luchas Rishonet and came down to Klal Yisrael. With what? He came down with the ore Pnimi, the ore Hagonus, the ore which the Baruch Shem hid on the first day, the ore which allows a person to see from one end of the world to the other in terms of being Mati Yehuda in the highest level possible. What happened to that ore? What happened to those luchas? The Baruch Shem said to Moshe, Lech rei, go down. Kishiches es amcha. Go down, you are no longer Mashiach ben Yosef. Go down. I will take back that ore and take it back to myself. I want the Eilish Mashiach back. Klal Yisrael is not Zeicha, forget it. He came down, he saw the Chet of the Egel. And this is what did it. The Chet of the Egel, because of the fact that the Baruch Shem had told them, Yasser Zediblet, made Klal Yisrael into an Eishatish, an Alusa. Klal Yisrael went ahead and created the union of the Chet of the Egel itself, which we went into before. It has to do with the kilkel of the union of Mashiach ben Yosef. But what happened? Moshe right away ran up to the Baruch Shem and he began into a tremendous dialogue with the Baruch Shem. This dialogue is a very pneumistic dialogue, because it's not just a question here of Moshe battling the Baruch Shem in terms of different kind of dinim. What did Moshe say to the Baruch Shem that finally convinced him to really do it, to go ahead and be Merchel Klal Yisrael? The Baruch Shem said to Moshe, give me back the Luchas Rishonos. I want them back. Klal Yisrael is no longer Zeicha to the Oil Shel Mashiach. And even though I promised, I was Maftiach, Avim Yitzim Yaakov, that I would bring through their children the Tikkun of the Bria, through the Yemot Mashiach, it will not come through these people. It will come through you, through your children. In that sense, your children will do it. From your children will build a nation, and from then they will bring the Tikkun Office of the Yemot Mashiach, and you'll be Zeicha again to the Oil Shel Mashiach. Moshe said, no, I don't want it. Moshe was put in the very same Nisoyan as Avraham was put in. It was a new Akedah. It was a new Akedah itself. And what Moshe said was, I don't want this. Klal Yisrael should be Zeicha exactly the same to the Luchas Rishonos. So the Baruch Shem says, I can't do it because the Makatrik, the Satan, is on my left ear. My left ear telling me, Makatrik. The accusations are so powerful from the Chet of the Ego, you see, that I can't overlook that. And what did Moshe Rabbeinu say? What Moshe said was the following. And the fundamental time he said was like this. Remember what? Remember the union of the Akedah Yitzchak. When Moshe Rabbeinu said Zechor Av Yitzchak Yaakov, what Moshe really did was to blow the shofar. That's what he really did. Except that he didn't blow the shofar in reality physically. What he did was he blew the shofar in its theme. And he said, remember the Akedah Yitzchak and be noig with Anovas HaYichud and be Moichel Klal Yisrael itself. You see. So the Baruch Shem said, I will be Moichel Klal Yisrael, but not in this kufa. I will build another nation from you. In other words, the zchus of Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov simply demands of me, or demands of the din, that ultimately the Zer of Avraham has to be the ones that go to the Yemot Mashiach. But who says these people? Let's make you a nation. So what the Baruch Shem tested was Moshe himself. Moshe was put in the exact same position that Avraham was tested. The zchus of it was not enough, in a sense. The zchus of it purely by itself was not enough to be matzah Klal Yisrael. It was simply enough to be matzah the Bria, and that some of the Zer Avraham should continue. But it was not enough to be matzah this Klal Yisrael. So what the Baruch Shem said, if you want to be matzah this Klal Yisrael, you have to go through the Nisoyan. You must go through the Nisoyan. If you want to be matzah this door. What was the Nisoyan that Moshe was put to? The Nisoyan was put to again, like we said before. the sense of personal achievement. When the Baruch Hashem says, let's do it through you. So Moshe was now in a quandary in that sense. Here I'm zocheh to an incredible thing that I can bring the Bria. I can bring the Tikkun of Bria to my own Zerah. Or shall I rather go on like it was in that sense before? Moshe instantly said, I don't want it. He overcame that personal sense of achievement himself and refused to acknowledge it. But this wasn't enough. He was only been a soyim. That's why it's called the Raya Mehemna, the true shepherd. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was only been a soyim. But this wasn't enough. What did Moshe say to the Baruch Hashem? He said a moedik taina. He said like this. He said, look, I am being only been a soyim. Between my Nesoyin and the Nesoyin of the Ovis, I want to be Ma'or Dachnagas HaYichud. Why? So he said, because the Goyim are going to say, Mi bilti Yechoyles Hashem, because of the inability of the Baruch Hashem to bring the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael, he destroyed them in the desert. What was the kindness to the Baruch Hashem? What do you mean what the Goyim say? The Baruch Hashem says, I don't care what the Goyim say. The point of fact now is that Mitzad Din, it's Tevla Alavoyim. According to the Tzad Din, Klal Yisrael should be destroyed. What do I care what they do? I'm a Dayan Emes. What, they're going to say I'm not a Dayan Emes? This is Mitzad Din. So what Moshe said, wait a minute. The entire Bria that you built is not Al Pi Din, fundamentally. But all Olam Haba is based on what's called the Midas HaYichud. Olam Haba is nothing more than an ability of the Neshamas at that time, or the people at that time, with their Gufim, to perceive what's called Midas HaYichud, or the Hasogas Yichudai. What is the Yichud HaBorei? The Yichud of the Baruch Hashem is the ability to bring a complete Yeshua no matter what circumstance there exists. What does that mean? That means that if Klal Yisrael does mitzvahs, he will bring a Yeshua or a Geula. And even if Klal Yisrael does Averis, he will bring a Geula. In other words, the Baruch Hashem can bring the ultimate Yeshua either through Toiv or he can bring it through Ra itself. The Baruch Hashem had the koyach to take pure evil and pure Ra and use it in such a fashion that the Ra itself will become the Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. Where do you see this? That there's a time of Tzor for Yaakov Umimena, from the Tzor itself comes Yeshua. What do we say? We say we thank the Baruch Hashem that what? That he afflicted us in a sense, and that he was Yeshua. What was Yeshua? It doesn't mean that the Baruch Hashem was saved us. But he goes on the Anisani. We say, I thank you, Baruch Hashem, because you afflicted me, you gave me tzoros. And the tzoros itself was the Yeshua. The evil which came over me, the difficulty, the tzoros, the churban, the golus that I had to go through, that itself brought the ultimate gula itself. Now you may say, how can you bring an ultimate gula by tzoros? How can Ra, or evil, how can absolute evil be the shaliach of absolute good? Good, this is an impossibility. Yes, it is impossible in Mitzad HaNugas HaMishpat, but not Mitzad HaNugas HaYichud, because that's the koyach of the Baruch Hashem. That's the very same thing that Avram himself was tested. Avram Avinu was tested fundamentally in the ability to be emunah in the Yichud, the ability of the Baruch Hashem to transcend contradictions. And fundamentally what Moshe was saying, and what exists by the Baruch Hashem, is that the Baruch Hashem has the ability to bring the Geula, either through Toiv or through Ra itself. That's why it says that the Mashiach comes be'ita or be'achishana. Either it comes bizmana, b'dor shekula chayovim, if they're all Rishonim, or b'gor the kula zakoyim tzadikim. The Baruch Hashem can bring the ultimate tikkun either way. It is the ability of the Baruch Hashem to bring this tikkun either way which shows us his enormous greatness. Because we can only understand a tikkun coming only one way. How can you bring a tikkun from absolute evil? That's the symbol of what's called yichud shlitasoi. That since the Baruch Hashem is the essence of existence itself, and therefore his will is the only will which is possible in the world, everything which he created in the world must serve his ultimate purpose. If his ultimate purpose is to bring a tikkun, is to bring a toiv, then everything that he created in the world must in some way contribute to that toiv. Even Ra, even evil. How is that possible? We do not understand, basically. Although we will understand that in Yemot Mashiach. But that's the side of the Yichud. The greatest hasaga we could have of the Baruch Hashem is to understand that his will is mekuyim in every action which happens in the world. Whether those actions are good or those actions are bad. That in both cases, the Geula will come forth. In either case. And that's his koyach. Therefore, the ability of the Baruch Hashem to bring the Geula, al-yidei toiv, shows that he's an emes dayan. But the ability for the Baruch Hashem to bring the Gula or the ultimate Tikkun al Yidei Ra shows us that he's a God. It shows us that he transcends every koyach and every force, that he manipulates every koyach and every force. More than that, but that everything which was created serves the ultimate rotzen which he himself has. That's the greatest raya, that Hashem Echad Ushmo Echad, that he is one. Even on Ra, Chazal say, Ato Reisel Adas, Ki Hashem Elokim Einoid Mevadoi. There is no one like him, there was no one but him. So Chazal say, Einoid Mevadoi, Afilu B'chshofim. Even in witchcraft. Why do Chazal pick witchcraft? Because that reveals the greatness of the Baruch Hashem in the greatest way. Why? Because this is the point, that if you say that the Baruch Hashem is the strongest one in the world, fine. But if you say that the Baruch Hashem has the ability to use that which is opposite to him, so that it actually conforms to him, there's no greater yichud than that. There's no greater indication of godliness or of control than that, of shlita. You see, even witchcraft, even though witchcraft appears to be a force or a power which is connected his will, but he controls witchcraft. Nay, he actually created witchcraft, and in the kishuv itself lies the koyach to be matar the bria and bring it to its tikkun. This is the hasaga which we will reach in Yom Mashiach and in Olam Haba. So Moshe Rabbeinu said this: if this is the hasaga which is Olam Haba, the hasaga tzechudoi, and if this is what you created the world, and this is what you want the world, you want us to say Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, Hashem Echad, afilu b'chshofen, afilu b'ra. He's sure of everything. So what are you going to tie into the goyim? The goyim will have an incredible time and say, look, you tell us that Hashem Echad, that the Baruch Hashem is l'mayla from everything. It's not true, because the Baruch Hashem is not l'mayla min adin. Even the Baruch Hashem is restricted by the Bezdin Shemala, and he must follow its dictates. That's what the Ummah Olam will say. It's true. The Baruch Hashem is a great God. We grant you that. He was greater than Mitzrayim. He was able to take out Yid Mitzrayim, as long as he thought that Klal Yisrael had chutzim. But as soon as Klal Yisrael no longer had chutzim, what did the Baruch Hashem do? He destroyed them. That's what he did, because he was unable to fulfill, he was unable to bring the Gula, the Tikkun Yeshua. He could not subvert or transcend his own Midas Hadin. Vusfan Alakim is us. That's the kind of the Goyim. And that's what Moshe said to him. If you destroy Klal Yisrael Mitzvah Din, what are you going to say to the Goyim? You can no longer say that you want them to believe, or the world, or the entire Bria, to say Hashem Echad Ishmo Echad. Because there is no yichud really in that sense. There's no yichud that you are visibly showing us. Whatever yichud you have is in your elokus. But if you want us to see your yichud, show us that you can be Meichel Klal Yisrael, and through the Mechil itself bring the ultimate Yeshua. This was an Eisen Ataina, and the truth of the matter is, as soon as the Baruch Hashem heard this, he said, Salachti Kid Boracha. What does it mean? It means Kid Boracha, like you said, like you Amoira, like your Taina. You say that the biggest Kiddush Hashem that I can make is to megala to the world, Hasogas Yechuda Ma Yichud. What? That I can be transcended the Ra, that I can use absolute evil and absolute din for absolute tov. Salachti Kid Boracha. I will do such a thing. I will be Moichel Klal Yisrael. However, it's Kid Boracha. The Mechila of Klal Yisrael will be the Hanogas Yichud itself. What does that mean? What does this mean? And herein lies the real depth of what happened by the Egel and what happened by the whole discussion between the Moshe and the Baruch himself. What does the Baruch mean by Salachti Kidoracha? First of all, Moshe knew instantly. He took the Luchas Rishonis, and what did he do? He took it and he threw it. Why did he throw it? Because he knew when the Baruch said Salachti Kidoracha, he knew he didn't have to return it. It was the Midas Hadin who demanded that the Luchas Rishonis, that the Orish Mashiach should be returned back to him. Once the Baruch was masking for the Hanogas HaYichud, through the personal Nisoyin of Moshe Rabbeinu, and through the Taina of the Hanogas HaYichud and the Schus Ovos, the Baruch said, I will do it your way. What is your way? Exactly, what does that mean, your way? Your way means taking the Uris of the Mashiach, taking it and keeping it on earth. In other words, once you've taken down the Uris of Mashiach, once you've taken down the Pnimis HaTorah, which no living person has ever seen, and once you've been zircha to take it down to the earth, I will not take it back to the Shemaim. I will allow it to be on earth. Except that since you did the Chet of the Egel, since Klal Yisrael is not zircha, they will not be allowed to see that Pnimis HaTorah. But the Pnimis HaTorah will be on the earth. What does it mean that the Pnimis HaTorah is in the world, yet we cannot see it? Like it says, Emes me'eretz titzmach. Emes, truth, will come from the ground, from the earth. Why? Because the Emes, the Rosh Mashiach, is taka on the earth. It's now, it's with us. But where is it with us? What was the greatest damage that Klal Yisrael did by the Chet of Egel? What was the true damage? The greatest damage that Klal Yisrael did by the Chet of Egel was that they took the ore of the Rishon, the Luchas Rishonis, and they caused it to be broken. That's really what the damage was, because that's what they saw. What does that mean that the Luchas Rishonis were broken and given to Klal Yisrael? What it means is the following: that if Klal Yisrael would Zoicha, Moshe would have brought in the Rosh Mashiach. With this ore, would have been a Torah in a certain surah. That surah is called the Torah B'Tzuras HaKeser. It is the Tayat Mitzvah in a certain kind of surah or certain kind of form. It would have been written in such a way that if anyone would have read the Torah, he would instantly be aware of the perfect and certain existence of the Baruch Shem, and he would understand why everything happened, why every event happened in human history and in the individual human history, in each person's life, exactly why it happened. In other words, the Rosh Mashiach is Megala through its Chochmah, through its Pnimius, the reason for everything that has ever happened in the world since the time of Adam Rishon. That's what the Koyach of that Or is. That's what Chazal say, that a person can see from the beginning of the world to the end. Why? He can see from one end to the other in the sense that he can see the Maisim of the Bonisham, the Hashkocha Plotis, down to its greatest Plotim and its highest Klolim. That's what that Or did. When they lost that Or went to the Klippa. What happened to that Or? That's when Or went into the Satan itself. Once the Satan was makativ against the ego, his Kippur expand. Except that the Kippur was not allowed to destroy Klal Yisrael, because the Bonishim says, Salachti Kidoracha. But the Satan took the Rosh Mashiach and took it to his own bosom. And he holds it himself. How? Because since the fact that the Torah, the Rosh Mashiach, is in the yad of the Satan, the Bonishim therefore had to give Klal Yisrael a new Torah. That Torah is called the Torah B'Tzuras HaChochmah. That is the Luchas Shniyim that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down. Moshe Rabbeinu had to go up again and bring down a second Luchas, right? And the Luchas Shniyim were not the same as the Luchas Rishonim. It was a different Luchas. It was the Torah in the hands of the Satan. The Tayat Mitzvahs of the Luchas Shniyim was a whole different Tayat Mitzvahs than the Luchas Rishonim. The Tayat Mitzvahs of the Luchas Rishonim was the Rosh Mashiach itself. It would have enabled any person learning it to understand every fundamental activity in the Bria itself. But the Luchas Shniyim would not give a person that ability. What would it do? It would simply allow a person, by doing the Tayat Mitzvahs, to arrange to masakin the chatoim that he does, so that eventually he will reach the Geula itself. But it did not allow him the incredible hasaga. In other words, the second Torah that was brought down was an instrument of activity, but it was not an instrument of understanding. The first Torah would have allowed Klal Yisrael to understand every secret in the Bria. The second Torah does not allow them, but allows them to perform certain kinds of activities which will ultimately allow them to come to this hasaga again. You see? So fundamentally what happened? What Klal Yisrael did by the Chet of the Egel is that they were matamei the Torah itself. They took the Torah, they took this Or, which is the essence of the Yemos Mashiach and the essence of Olam Haba, and they put it into a klippa. They were matama. I don't mean they were matama the Divra Torah as such, but they were matama the Tzuras HaTorah, so that the Torah now had to be put into a different form. That was the Luchas Shniyos. That's what they did. When did Moshe bring down the Luchas Shniyos? On the 10th day of Tishrei. On the first day of Elul he went up, on the 10th day of Tishrei he came down. Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Luchas Shniyos on the 10th day of Tishrei. What does that mean? It means that the effect of the Chet of the Egel was not seen until the 10th day of Tishrei. Because that's what it was. The effect, the ultimate consequence of the Chet of the Egel was the Tumah of the Torah, with the Luchas Shniyos. But that was not seen until the 10th day of Tishrei. Even though the Chet of the Egel occurred in Shivas B'Tammuz. The Chet of the Egel occurred in the Shivas B'Tammuz before. It was not until several months later that Moshe actually brought down the result of that Chet on the 10th day of Tishrei. But what did the Bonishim say to Moshe? The Bonishim said an amazing thing. The Bonishim said, Salachti Kizuracha. It was, I will be Saleh Klal Yisrael exactly in the middle that you want. You want Masaleh them, it will be done. But what is the essence of the Hanagas HaYichud? The essence of the Hanagas HaYichud is the ability of the Bnei Shalom to bring a tikkun, mitzar Allah. In other words, it's the ability of the Bnei Shalom to matahar someone or something, even though it's tomei, or rather, through its tumah, he's matahar. That's exactly what Yichud is. That's exactly the gift of the Luchas Shnias. What the Bnei Shalom said, you will matama the Torah. And what the Bnei Shalom said to Moshe, the very Torah that you will matame, that's the Torah which will be matar you. You see, in other words, the very Torah that we have is the greatest evidence of the Hanagas HaYichud. Because it's the Torah of the Pnimis Torah encased in a Chetzonius. It's a Torah which has Tum on it, which has Hester on it, but from that very state of Hester, from that very state of Torah, which is surrounded by a Zermah, that is the very Torah which will be ultimately Matara to bring it to a level of being Masi, the Pnimis Torah itself. But how is that possible? How in God's name can something be Matame and Matara at the same time? You see, that's the soid which no one can understand. That's the essence of what happened on Yom Kippur. That's what Moshe brought down. Moshe Rabbeinu brought down the consequence of the result of the Chet of the Egel. But what was that consequence? The consequence of the Chet of the Egel was the Salachti Ketvaracha. It was the fact that the Torah which is brought down, which even though it's Matame, that same Torah Matama will be Matario. So what the Bnei Shalom said, therefore, that day is Mesugul for the Hanagas HaYichud itself. The day that the consequence of the Hanagas HaYichud was seen through the Luchas Shniyim is the day that the Hanagas HaYichud is shuled completely. And that's the day of the Hashpah, where the Hanagas HaYichud reigns completely. And on that day, there is no Makatrik. So that's the awe of Yom Kippur. The awe of Yom Kippur is really the awe of the Luchas Shniyim. But what's the awe of the Luchas Shniyim? The awe of the Luchas Shniyim is the essence of the contradiction which we see. But it's the essence of the Yichud HaBorei. It's the essence of what makes him a God. His ability to accomplish one thing by using the exact opposite process. You see, that's what's clearly reflected in Yom Kippur. And therefore Yom Kippur is the day which is Mesukal to that Yichud. No, a day which is Mesukal to Yichud is a day of no Kippur. Hence the Satan has no shlita whatsoever in being Kativ that day. But more than that, the day of Yom Kippur is also the day which is Machapa on the Chet of the Egel itself. Because that's the day that the result of the thing came down. That's the day that the result of the Chet of the Egel came. So that's the day which is also Machapa on the whole Indian of the Chet of the Egel. So what the Bnei Shalom said, Salachti Kezracha, the day that the Hanagas HaYichud was manifest, to give you the Torah which manifests my Yichud, that's the day which every year from now on there will be Hashpah of Yichud, so that Lifnei Hashem Tithoru. On that day, you will always erase a little bit of the Zoyamah and the Kilkul which you brought in because of the Chet of the Egel. Lifnei Hashem Tithoru. On that day you will also be able to remove Mitarat Echem from the Zoyamah that you bring in from all the Chatoim of that year, of that day. That day is Mesugel for Hanagas HaYichud. And basically that day is also when the Akedah Yitzhak took place. Also on that day. Where do we see, just to reinforce what we're saying, where do we see this concept that the Bnei Shalom has this capacity to reconcile contradictions? This is the state of the Por Aduma. What is the meaning of the Por Aduma? The Por Aduma is Matame Toharim and it's Matat Meim. How could one thing do two opposite parts at the same time? So it says there that the Ummah Olam and the Sultan look at the Por Aduma and they laugh. They say this is impossible. How could such a thing transpire? The answer is because this comes from the Soid HaYichud itself, which the Sultan is not privy to, which the Ummah Olam are not privy to, which no one is privy to. It's Exerim Rafonai. It's the ability of the Bnei Shalom to be Matar Toim and Matamat Meim through the same device. The essence of the Por Aduma lies in the essence of Yom Kippur. It's the essence of Hanagas HaYichud itself, which therefore lies in the Torah itself. The Torah is exactly the reflection of the Por Aduma. And this is the whole thing. The Soid of the Por Aduma is the Soid of the Torah itself. Because since the Torah itself is in a position of Tumah, which is Matar, the Por Aduma is in a position of Tumah, which is Matar. And that's exactly the Matzah of the Mashiach and Yosef, which is also in a position of Tumah, Matar. And this is fundamentally the basic principle involved in this way. So that we see a listing thing. We see that the essence of Rosh Hashana is the union of Kiyum, to Mekayim the Bria, but the essence of Yom Kippur is the union of Tahara. to be matar the bria from the kilkul that didn't bring in because of the chet. But the essence of Rosh Hashanah is the fact that the Hanukkah Yichud was established through the Bezdin Jamala, through Din, through the Hanukkah Mishpah itself, and the essence of Yom Kippur is the fact that the Hanukkah Yichud is sholit and toiled that day, so that the Mekatik is not there to bring the bria and all of Klal Yisrael to a state of total Tahara. And Klal Yisrael therefore has an incredible ability. And I tell you, don't underestimate the ability of Yom Kippur. You think when you sit down, you're davening, you're davening, look, maybe the Baruch Shem Merchel or not. That's not true. If you're ma'ani yourself those 5 ways by being purged from your guf, you see, and if you oisik in tefillah and tshuva, it must be accepted because that's the guarantee of the day. It's an incredible thing because only on that day, and that's the only day that Klal Yisrael has the ability, is to force Kaviyachol, the Baruch Shem, to be Soleach Klal Yisrael. And that's really what it is. Any other day you cannot do this. You don't have the koyach because the Mekati can undermine it. But on Yom Kippur, a person has the ability, mamash, to force the Bezdin Shemala to be moichel him. That's the power that a Yom Kippur has. And that power comes from the Haftoch the Moshe Rabbeinu. Solachti k'voracha. Solachti, but mamash k'voracha. Exactly like you say. You taina that I will make a chil Hashem to the goyim by being Masti Yechudoi. I will be Megali Yechudai in exactly that way. That the same Torah that they will matama, that Torah of Gufa will be matah them. And this is the Indian fundamentally of Yom Kippur itself.